This is an experience I wouldn't wish on anyone. There hasn't been a day since that we haven't been thinking about and working on this case. I think anyone who doesn't feel some emotions in this case
like you, be strong to hold the powers of the sun.
I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Listen to Pavarotti. Can I be your superhero?
Hello, welcome to The Revealing, and I am your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. And the response from a video last night was wonderful, and I'm currently going through all of the comments and all the suggestions, and I hope I'm not the only one out there that feels the way that I do, or we can come up with somebody to absolutely hammer. And I'll go over, some of those suggestions, and hopefully others out there will chime in, and we can all come to an agreement and work together and do that. But in this video, I have got a barn burner for you, because as much information as they want to hide from us, they just can't hide it all. And they leak out just a little bit too much here and there and give us too much of a trail of breadcrumbs for us not to figure some things out. I am going to blow your mind in this one. So hold on to your ears. I don't want it coming out your head. We are going to go with this thing just a little bit different than normal. Normally, I like to go at it from what really happened, because that's the most accurate perspective to get into the truth. But to do that, you have to go with this thing from different ways. I preach this a lot. One way that I go at a lot of the time is the investigation. Head at it. What were the investigators really thinking happened in this case? But then there's a whole nother angle you can go at things, and that is from the angle of what the defense truly believed happened in this case, because it will give you some insight. And I have been going through what the defense believed happened in this case now that we have court documents, we have police reports, we have all kinds of information that leads us down the path to the truth. And in this episode, I may have discovered yet once again another alternative perpetrator. And it is certainly an alternative perpetrator that the defense was trying to point out in many hearings and with many documents, a lot of which we were not able to see. There was documents that were filed in this case. For example, I know Kathy with the Indie Zone and I have both kind of gone back and forth on some of the subpoenas. Specifically, some of the subpoena duces tecums that were filed by the defense in this case that never hit the court docs. Well, now that we have a record of those, and we have records of a lot of other things, we can finally put the pieces of those records together. And what does it actually spell out? Let me just tell you before we get into it. It spells out another alternate perpetrator, one that has not been on my radar, that I have not identified yet. But I can tell you right now, he's 41 years old. He lived in Pullman, Washington, and he was not of American descent. That's right. Looks like we might have an actual cartel member here, or possibly just another alternate perpetrator. I don't know, but I'm going to show you the evidence that backs it up, and I'm going to show you the breadcrumb trail the defense left us in this one. And when I say hold on to your hats, folks, I mean hold on to your hats. This is going to be one of those pie blowout videos. Let's roll. Picking fly shit out of black pepper. Okay, so once again, using a timeline to back up the accuracy of my report to you. On December the 18th, 2022, the prosecution submits Eric's seat expert disclosure in the case against Brian Kohberger. For those of you that have followed me for a long time, you know I have dove in deep on Eric's seat and his disclosures in the past. Now I have even more information to back up what a lot of this case is about and has been hidden from us for. Now, the defense had filed a motion in limine to limit testimony of expert witnesses due to lack of disclosure from the prosecution. This is the prosecution's response to the defense's motion in limine. And it says the state filed an expert disclosure for Mr. Seat on December 18th, 2024. In accordance with the court's guidance on January 23rd, 2025, the state filed an amended disclosure for Mr. Seat on March 3rd, 2025. That disclosure addresses the concerns, i.e., YSTR testing, raised by the defendant in his motion. The state submits these disclosures comply with ICR Rule 16b7 and Idaho Rules of Evidence 702, 703, and 705. But there's some things that I want to point out. Number one, they filed the initial expert disclosure from the state for Eric Seat on December 18, 2024. He is a forensic specialist for the ISP, and he is the one that did YSTR testing on something in this case. And you can see that this particular disclosure in the rebuttal, they're specifically pointing to the YSTR testing, Idaho Criminal Rule 16b7 and Rules of Evidence 702, 703, and 705. All of this is very important to remember. So December 18th, prosecution submits Eric Seat's expert disclosure initially. Followed 8 days later, on December 26, 2022, the defense issues a subpoena duces tecum, and we were never able to find out what was in that subpoena duces tecum. I now contend that it was in response to the initial disclosure by prosecution expert Eric Seat. And you can see from the case summary at the time that a subpoena duces tecum was issued by the defense on December 26th and followed the next day by a motion to compel by the defense. What is that motion to compel? ICR 16b7 material, and the defense was asking for sanctions that we were never able to see. So what was it about? December 27th, the day after they filed the subpoena duces tecum, they filed for a motion to compel concerning ICR 16b7, and they asked for sanctions. Motion to compel, ICR 16b7, ask for sanctions. It's absolutely related to the subpoena duces tecum. And what is 16b7, y'all? Expert witnesses. On written request of the defendant, the prosecutor must provide a written summary or report of any testimony that the state intends to introduce at trial or at a hearing pursuant to Rules 702, 703, or 705 of the Idaho Rules of Evidence. Sound familiar? This is 16b7, specifically citing 702, 703, and 705, and it all pertains to testimony of an expert witness. Again, Eric Seat, his disclosure was filed on December 18th, and it was about YSTR testing, and the state submits that this disclosure complied with 16b7, Rules of Evidence 702, 703, and 705. So there can be no mistake. This testimony is what the defense was filing the motion to compel, asking for sanctions for, and they wanted the duces tecum. What did it entail? Eric Seat, expert opinion of this DNA technician, provides an explanation of possible testimony regarding a methodology for DNA testing, YSTR, for which the defense has received no discovery or indication that the method has been used in this case. There's no opinion disclosed other than because of the large volume of discovery, the state directs the defense to summary reports of the expert's ultimate conclusions, which can be found in lab report number 3. Lab Report 3, Bates number 5721 through 5731, is DNA data of an alternate suspect, but no ultimate opinion or result is specified. We have got to get access to Lab Report number 3 because I believe it's going to be a huge key in this case. Testimony through this witness, other than relating to an alternate perpetrator, must be prohibited pursuant to Idaho Criminal Rule 16, Idaho Rules of Evidence, the court scheduling order, and Mr. Kohberger's federal and state constitutional rights of a fair trial, confrontation, and due process. So this is the sanctions that the defense was actually wanting that they listed up here in their motion to compel the 16B7 material for sanctions, right after they issued the subpoena duces tecum, wanting the discovery for whatever the report was that Eric Seat had actually submitted on the alternate perpetrator, the alternate suspect, with the YSTR sample, the only YSTR done in this case. This is going to be big, y'all. I now understand what most of the cryptic testimony that Ann Taylor was grilling Rylene Nolan about in the closed hearing that we only got a transcript of. I finally understand what she was doing. As she was going through and she was questioning Rylene Nolan, she was questioning her about her ability to look at samples and exclude or include comparisons based on just looking at the samples. She focused in on a DNA mixture that they got out of the trash pull of Kohberger's residence. When they pulled Kohberger's trash at his parents' house, they got his dad's DNA, which they called male E, and there was a mixture in there of Kohberger and one of the other females in the house. And she was grilling them on the fact that they compared his dad's DNA to the knife sheath sample and other samples of evidence throughout the residence, but did not compare Kohberger's actual DNA that they actually had. But the way she was asking the questions, she would trip her up, and then she would go to unknown male B. And we know unknown male B is blood on a handrail. And the reason that she was saying she couldn't compare samples because of unknown male B to known samples was because unknown male B was a mixture, much like Kohberger's mixture in the trash. And Ann Taylor kept trying to trip her up. But in doing so, she let us in on what the YSTR sample actually was. Because as I just read to you in the report from Eric Seat, the YSTR sample pertained to an alternative suspect in this case. She lets us know where that YSTR sample came from. And it came from a cigarette butt that was collected from an individual. But not only that, I now understand what her testimony, what her questioning of Matthew Gamet of the Idaho State Police Lab, he's the director, as it related to why he was questioning Othram Labs about communications he had with them about YSTR sampling as well. It looks to me like they may have even sent the DNA off of that cigarette butt they collected to Othram and had Othram do a private investigation into that one. And that is going to be something that they're trying to hide this entire case around, as well as other things like Mowich. But this is absolutely crazy. Check it out. All right, so following the progression of events in this one more time, and by the way, I kept putting 2022 is actually 2020. This is actually 2024, December 18th, 2024, December 26th, 2024, December 27th, 2024. All this was done in preparation of this January 23rd, 2025 closed hearing that they had on the Franks portion of the IGG. And this is going to be testimony from that closed hearing coming from the transcript. And you can see right here, certified transcript, January 23rd, 2025, started at 9 a.m. And when we go to page 62, the questioning starts where its key is right here. I need you to help me understand that a little bit. This is Ann Taylor. I need you to help me understand that a little bit. I'm having that question because I understand there was an unknown male B, which is blood on the handrail, found on lab item 30. Do you know what I'm talking about? Rylene Nolan. No. Okay, well, I also understand that there was a cigarette butt taken from somebody in connection with the case investigation. Are you familiar with that? Very quickly, she says, I am familiar with that. And that was compared to the DNA on the knife sheath. Is that right? Yes. And that was found to be excludable. Am I using that word right? It was an exclusion, correct. So she got her right there. So you compared something that was taken from somebody to an item of evidence. Is that right? Something that was a secondary reference, as in someone identified it as they saw that person using that item. They saw that person dispose of that item. That item was collected and used as a reference sample from that person because there was someone who said that is from that person. So she's basically saying, yeah, we compared that DNA off of the cigarette to the DNA on the knife sheath. Okay, but when you got the trash to go through in the lab, you knew that you were looking for a male, right? Correct. And you knew that the male and his family members lived in a house that produced that bag of trash. Is that right? Yes, but not who produced each individual item in the trash pool. Okay. It wasn't labeled, this was a water bottle from this person and so forth. And one of those items you took and developed male E. That's Kohberger's dad. I did not, but yes, the laboratory did. In general, the lab developed male E, correct. And compared male A, which is the DNA on the knife sheath, and male E. There was a paternity statistic calculated because they were both single source profiles, meaning only from one individual. Okay, and there's another male profile. That was part of a mixture, to my knowledge, meaning more than one person's DNA present on that item. Again, only one male though. Is that right? So when there's a mixture of an item, and then she goes through and talks about mixtures. Okay, did you tell me though, on that sample, and I'm talking about 95.9.1, this is the DNA mixture in the Kohberger trash pool that contained actually Brian Kohberger and one of the females in the house. So did you tell me that on that sample I'm talking about, 95.9.1, that was a male and a female? I believe that. I don't know if it was designated as that in the laboratory report. To my knowledge, it was. I can't remember what the report said. Again, I didn't generate the report and didn't do the work, so I'm not as familiar with it as if it was my own work. And then Ann Taylor, after getting her to admit that they didn't do the comparison because it was a mixture, jumps right back into, okay, male B was also a mixture, wasn't it? I don't know. Okay, if it was designated as unknown male B, again, I don't know if it was from a mixed sample or not. And then she says, okay, Your Honor, if I may have just a moment, thank you for that. And then she changes and switches gears. What she got her to admit was they compared unknown male, they didn't compare unknown male B, which was the mixture of the blood on the handrail, to the YSTR sample that was gathered from the cigarette butt. They only compared the YSTR sample that was gathered from the cigarette butt to the touch DNA on the knife sheath. And she got her to admit that she didn't do it because it was a mixture. And then when you go down to the testimony of Matthew Gammett, then the STR angle of the sample really comes into play. And Ann Taylor wanted to get him on the record about this STR sample, this YSTR sample, by the way. The only YSTR that has been mentioned in this entire case, which was the YSTR sample that was created from the cigarette butt in the case. And she started off the questioning with Gammett as, was this the first case that Othram worked pursuant to that, correct? Or pursuant to that contract? He said, no, I don't believe so. How did they get the DNA? The DNA sample itself, that DNA sample was delivered by MPD in person to Othram Labs. And she says, did you have any role in that part? And he said, I did. So Gamut actually traveled with Blaker, we now know, to deliver the DNA sample to Othram. And what did you do? I accompanied the officer from Boise down to Houston and down to Othram Laboratory. I didn't have possession of the sample, but I was with the investigator that did. That would have been Blaker. After that sample was delivered, did you have communications with Othram further? And this is where she dives in on the communications that she found between him and Othram. He says, yes. What were those? So I had communications to my memory with them about what type of analysis we were asking them to do. Also, what type of searching. I remember they asked specifically for consent to do certain types of searching. We had to authorize things through memos and whatnot of them doing certain searching. Specifically, I believe it was family tree DNA that they needed an authorization for. And then he throws in at the end, I remember having significant discussions with them about YSTR testing and if or how that would be accomplished. Why did you want Othram to do YSTR testing? She's obviously gathered something from their communications about this YSTR. So the reason for YSTR testing is to utilize different investigative databases that might be out there. I don't believe in this case we ever did YSTR testing. A lot of the discussion was around preservation of the sample or as much of the sample as we could preserve. So our recommendation to them was not to proceed with this type of testing at this time to kind of see where we were able to go with the traditional S&P testing with the whole genome sequencing. And then we would maybe potentially revisit the YSTR testing. And Taylor knew that he had been talking to them about YSTR testing from a YSTR sample that he knows that never had anything to do with that DNA from the touch on the button snap of the knife sheath in this case. So, what is the deal with the YSTR testing and the cigarette butt? We now have police reports that lead us to one of the real suspects in the case. Now, there's only a couple of instances where they talk about collecting cigarettes as evidence in this case. And one of those is going to be ISP report supplement number 34, where they talk about on November 13th, 2022 is the unalivings, and Detective Talbot was assigned lead crime scene investigator. And then on November 17th and 18th, ISP Forensic Services personnel returned to the scene to further processing and evidence collection. All items collected was turned over to the ISP. And one of the things that they collected on November 17th and 18th, and by the way, if you're going through the witness list trying to identify people, right here it tells you ISP forensic scientists Jenny Ayers, Carrie Hogan, Tara Martinez, Wyatt Berry. And one of the things that they did collect was a cigarette butt collected from the yard south side of the house behind the sofa. But this is not the one they created the YSTR sample on, because it states that they actually had seen the guy that deposited the cigarette they created the YSTR sample on. So it is an actual suspect. And when we go to MPD report number 34, and it's written by John Rosinski. And what is he talking about? Rosinski's booking of 2 cigarette butts on Detective Adam ISP's behalf. And it says on November 21st, 2022, I was asked by Detective Adams with the Idaho State Police to book 2 cigarette butts into evidence that he collected. Detective Adams brought the 2 cigarette butts to MPD evidence room, where I watched him place them both into 2 separate ISP envelopes. I sealed the envelopes with evidence tape, signed the tape for both. The chain of custody was filled out on both envelopes. I booked the 2 envelopes into MPD evidence and was requested they be sent to the state lab. I took photographs of the cigarette butts and attached them to this case file. And then he certifies or declares under penalty of perjury that everything is correct. And when was it reviewed? Wednesday, November 23rd, 2022. As I've said many times, there is 3 key dates in this case. The 23rd, the 14th of December, and the 19th of December. So whenever you see these dates, it's always a red flag. But where do these cigarette butts come from? Well, it came from the Idaho State Police that gave them to him to book into evidence, Detective Adams. So this is going to be one of the actual alternate perpetrators in this case. This is going to be where they got the YSTR sample for the alternate perpetrator that Ann Taylor was trying to hammer home in that secret hearing. Because you can see on November 21st, 2022, Detective Adams, along with ISP detectives, conducted surveillance at probably some apartment building in Pullman, Washington. I ultimately seized 2 discarded cigarette butts from a male suspected to be, I wonder who this is. I don't know, but their date of birth is 1981 at the steps leading to the entrance of the apartment. And you can see, along with ISP detectives Herman, Henel, Walker, and Sergeant Stinnett. 4 of them was out there conducting surveillance of the residence. While conducting surveillance, we observed a male who appeared to be whoever this male is. The male would come out every few hours to smoke cigarettes on the west-facing steps to the entrance of the building. So it's obviously an apartment building. At approximately 1,512 hours, I observed that male put out his cigarette between his feet. He then began smoking a second cigarette. He's a chain smoker. When he was done, he again put the cigarette out between his feet. I could see 2 cigarette butts between his feet. A few moments later, that person stood up and went back inside. After he got up, the cigarette butts were not in the location where I saw him leave them. He was sitting on the steps leading to a community entrance door where multiple people use it to enter the building and then go to whichever apartment they were going to. The steps blank was on something faced west. There is another set of steps on the east side leading to the landing where both sets of steps give access to the landing where the door is located. There are paved walkways leading from sidewalks to the entrance of the building. Detective Herman contacted a local officer and asked about obtaining the cigarette butts from the walkway of the building. That officer contacted a local prosecutor who advised us that if the butts were in a common walkway and a walkway leading to a public sidewalk to the entrance, then we could walk up, grab the discarded cigarette butts, and leave without a warrant. At approximately 1,600 hours, I exited my vehicle, went to the area where the cigarette butts were seen. While at the bottom of the steps where this person had been seen smoking, I saw 2 cigarette butts in the area where blank feet were located. One cigarette butt was to the right of where his foot had been located. The other cigarette butt was near the stair behind where his left foot had been located. Both cigarette butts appeared to be fresh. I also noticed a can near the stairs full of cigarette butts. I did not retrieve any of those cigarette butts and only collected the 2 cigarette butts that appeared fresh in close proximity to where I had seen this person drop the cigarette butts. After collecting the cigarette butts, I placed them in a paper envelope, transported them to the Moscow Police Department where they were booked into evidence by Moscow Police Officer John Rosinski. The cigarette butts were placed into separate evidence envelopes and booked into evidence under MPD case number 22M09903, item number 252 and 253. End of the report. These are the cigarette butts Eric Seat created the YSTR profile from that Rylene Nolan took and compared to the DNA on the knife sheath, but as Ann Taylor got her to admit, she never compared to unknown male B, which was the unknown male blood on the handrail. So once again, this is going to be another one of those alternate perpetrators, probably one of the ones that actually committed the atrocity, and we need to figure out who this one is. And let me tell you, suspect number 1 here is a male, date of birth 1981, so he was 41 at the time. They do not put his ethnicity in here, which we can assume was not Caucasian because his resident status is non-resident, meaning he is not a resident of the United States, y'all. This is more than likely going to be somebody of some other ethnicity from some other country, who is a chain smoker, who they had 4 officers on surveillance on in Pullman, Washington, zip code 99163. This is the one we need to see comparisons from on what Ann Taylor wanted to subpoena Duces Tecum on, which was issued on December the 26th, 2024. And this is lab report number 3, where it's probably going to have some really significant information that they're trying to keep from us. So now we've got another possible suspect in this case that I think is even more than possible, because the defense was really keying in on this. And it's obvious that they had this DNA sample from this guy with his cigarette butt, and they were probably comparing it to other DNA on the scene. And who the heck is this guy? Well, you can bet we're going to find out. And I want to send this message out to all of these corrupt officials, prosecutors, judges, university personnel, and town leaders up there in Idaho. You can try to hide this stuff as much as you want, but you're going to let enough out for us to be able to nail you on this. So continuing to try to hide everything from the public is probably not the smart thing to do, because when we do finally nail you, you're going to look even worse for trying to hide it even longer than you should have. Expose it now, or we're going to expose it for you. And when we do, it isn't going to be good for you. Please like and subscribe to this channel. Post your comments, thoughts, criticisms. Till next time, Pavarotti is out.
Am I the only one sitting here, still holding on, holding back my tears for the ones who paid with the lives they gave? God bless the U.S.